psychedelics often kind of obliterate the idea of future and past or whatever and bring you into the present moment. I think that's probably the greatest asset that the tool of psychedelics offers. And what is music? Music is now. And so it helps kind of sharpen the sense of now because you're existing in the now. So the two work together seamlessly in that way. It's all about the now and what can be better. What could be it's like a tool in your tool belt to like really celebrate the now.
I am chronicling music culture as a vocation, and that is an abundance that I would have never imagined. So I give thanks.
This is the Weird Music Podcast. We've got Random Rab here. Rab, so glad to have you here, man. So to start this off, I think it'd be cool to talk about this book I'm reading. I'm currently reading a book by Victor Wooten. It's called The Music Lesson. Basically, it's about the spiritual inner workings of music. And it's just this like almost like homeless person, quasi-angel guru is giving all of these like Yoda-like lessons about how music works. And I want to ask you, have there been any books that have been especially impactful for you in shaping not only your approach to music, but just kind of how your mind works?
Yes, there have been. I mean, there's a couple. There's one that I wish I could remember the name of it, and it's escaping me right now, that I read a long time ago that was kind of what you were saying earlier. It's kind of about psychology and like more of a scientific approach of how music affects our brain, people who have in comas, that kind of thing. And the name is escaping me. It might come back to me before the end of this podcast. But I think one of the ones I love the most is called Art is the Way. It's a really incredible book that it has cool drawings and kind of like poetry mixed with kind of like life lessons, meditations. It's a little bit more of a esoteric approach, to understanding music. I really like the books that have to do with science and music the most, though. Things about how it physically affects our brains, or that works with animals. It just gives me a lot more to work with. Reading about kind of the creative aspects of music can sometimes be a little bit mind-bending because it's just so personal, rather than with using science. It's a lot more kind of functional. And I like to think of when I'm creating music too, it's kind of like there's creativity is definitely a part of it. I mean, that's a huge part of it, obviously, but it's also science. It's like we're working with technology, we're working with frequencies, we're working with the interplay of mass and matter and energy. And so it's really important for me because the creativity part of it is just more of a, like I said, it's much more of a personal thing. But when the science part of it is something that I don't really understand intuitively, and it's important to learn about it and how music works, and really trying to understand what music really even is, because no one's been able to define that for me. And I haven't been able to define it for myself. I know that there's sound involved. I know my ears are involved, but beyond that, it's sort of like, well, why do I enjoy it? Why does anybody enjoy it? How can I make a song that I like, I love, share it with somebody, they love it, and if they love it, there's some connection there. There's like a personality, something about our personalities intersects that allows the music to share some sort of feeling and emotion. And that part of it has always been the great mystery that I've never been able to quite understand what's really even happening there. So yeah, there's lots of books and information out there that I've been trying to bring into that part of my understanding of music.
So based on what you've learned about the science of music and how it works, how it affects the mind, what would you say are some of the key sticking points that you've learned?
Well, I think that there's like different parts of our brain that are working when we're listening to music. We have the things like memories. We also have things, emotions. We have how, and then there's also kind of like the deeper kind of amygdala, kind of like the lizard brain, and like what stimulates that, and how, just basic stuff like fear, anxiety. Like people who, work in movies have a really good understanding of this, of like, how do you create tension, or a certain sound will make you feel scared, or a certain sound will make you feel relaxed and like you're in your mother's arms listening to a lullaby. Like, for instance, with the lullaby, worldwide, parents, mothers will sing lullabies to their children. And there's like these kind of like similarities. You're not having one culture that's singing something that would be the equivalent of heavy metal to their baby, because that's going to scare the hell out of their baby, right? So there's certain things about our like primal nature that we respond to certain sounds in a certain way, and trying to understand the different parts of our brain that get stimulated. And there's certain music that is like much more intellectual, that really is more of a, you know, intellectual experience that stimulates that part of our brain. And people who tend to be highly intellectual like to listen to a certain type of music. And there's other music that's just like makes your booty shake, right? And you can't even explain it. You're not thinking about it. It just gives that feeling. So trying to find, like, when you're composing music, like where does this piece of music fit into that, or where does the sound fit into that? You know, like a lot of times producers will use things like ear candy to stimulate the little different aspects of our brain, but the song itself, it resides in another area, right? So you're kind of like playing around with the different part. Like one example, like for me, is like psytrance. If you've ever been to like a psytrance concert, or a festival rather, is usually where I don't think I've ever been to a psytrance concert, but how it almost feels like it's stimulating like the deep lizard brain, like the part of us that is like most closely related to a crocodile or something. It has this real primal kind of that repetitive beat, you know, and there's not a lot really going on melodically in like the bass realm, but there's something going on in our psyche that relates to that type of sound, the repetitive thing, and it's much more basic, right? When I say basic, I don't mean like creatively basic, but I mean like more like baseline for who we are as living life forms that have consciousness, right? So that's how I try and think of it sometimes.
So with this like understanding you just kind of shared with us, in practice, how can you give me examples of how you like apply this in the music you make?
Well, I think, you know, it's like when I first started producing, I was really trying to be something. I was trying to impress myself and impress other people. And I thought that the way to do that was to create complexity where there maybe didn't need to be any, to create a sense of like, I'm going to blow you out of the water because I'm going to do some sort of trick or some sort of approach that's going to like make you think that I'm really cool and that I'm really good. And so I want to impress you and just be cool in your eyes, right? So I would do things that I felt were more from that place of insecurity and wanting to blow people's minds, right? And as I've started to more and more as I do it, I really think about more emotions, you know, like how does this feel? How does this really, really, truly feel? And sometimes that means simplify, like get away from the idea that I have to do some complex turnaround on the bass line or some really crazy melodic solo, or even like from the point of view of like the physicality of like being able to play guitar, like to do like some crazy arpeggio because I want people to think I'm a really good guitar player, versus maybe it just needs one note, right? Without any ego to make it actually, that's what's really going to sound good. And I find often as I listen to songs, the more I listen to a song, the more the simple beauty of the song is what I come back to. And the more complex stuff, unless it has some sort of constantly stimulating aspect to it, emotionally, I just find it kind of gets annoying, you know? So I usually try to throw everything at the wall when I'm making a track, all sorts of complicated stuff, and then pull things away until there's just left what needs to be there, the heart of this song. I'm not always successful at it, and you always stumble along the way, but I find that that's where I really end up finding the center of the song, is just by stripping away all the unnecessary bullshit and really getting into the kind of the emotional beauty, the feeling, the feeling of feeling good, the feeling of interested and happy, or whatever it is emotion I'm trying to get across.
How do you feel about the concept with originality in music?
Well, I mean, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, and with Western music especially, you know, we're pretty confined with, we have like 12 notes to work with, and rhythmically, you know, there's how many places can you put a kick drum, right? How many places can you put a snare drum? Often we put them in the same spot. I mean, I have hundreds of songs probably with kick drum, this kick pattern, or this kick pattern, or this kick pattern, this snare pattern. I mean, the snare is almost always, 2 and 4, whatever. It's like there's these certain things that we do that are completely not original at all, right? And the fact that we're working within the confines of a 12-note scale also creates another limitation. However, there's some sort of unfolding mystery with the way you combine all these different elements that sort of fractals out into infinite possibility, even though it seems confining, especially when you start to add, harmony, timbre, and the nuance of the fluctuations of rhythm. And before you know it, you've created something that maybe seems completely original. However, if you start to dig deeper, I can't tell you how many times I've made a song and I'll be like, oh shit, that chord structure is exactly the same as some huge famous song. And I'm like, oh fuck, I screwed that one up. I mean, but at the same time, no one's gonna know it because it's the subtle differences that really make the song powerful. However, there's another aspect of that, which is, when you are ripping people off, like a much more complex melodic thing. I mean, there is a certain realm where you can get into where you do start to get into the I'm ripping someone off territory. But I think that if you're making music from the heart and aren't thinking about other people's music when you're creating, that's pretty hard to stumble into that. It can happen, but and then there's a straight sampling other people and repurposing things like that, and that's a whole different thing, and there's beauty in that too. So it's sort of like originality is a very fluid term, and anyone who thinks they're completely 100% original when they're making music, unless it's something like Richard Devine or some like high tech, pushing the realms of what's even possible with sound, you're kind of fooling yourself. So I think it's really just relax, be okay with what you're doing, and try not to imitate too much, but don't kill yourself if you've come up with a 3-note arpeggio that a million other people used.
Rab, I want to step to the side here,
Mhm.
jump in the time machine.
Mm-hmm.
So back when you had your first psychedelic experience,
Okay.
I'm curious how that ultimately shaped you, looking back on it, and just what that was like.
I've told the story a couple times just because it has come up, this question, a lot, because I happen to make psychedelic music. Basically, I came out to Oregon and met this woman. She was this incredible blue nail polish, kind of someone who I had never really, a person I had never seen before, and saw this homeless man, and she gave this guy a dozen roses, and he was so happy. He started crying, and he gave her a bag of mushrooms, and then she gave me half the mushrooms, and I never saw her again. And I took these mushrooms to the coast of, at that time it was like California Oregon border there, and ate these mushrooms. And before that, I was basically an atheist, and I loved music, but it wasn't really the path of my life, I guess, at that point. I had this incredible experience, got to see redwoods for the first time, little slugs, the whole gamut of what's out there on the Northern California coast and Southern Oregon. And I came to the ocean, much like the clouds that are behind your face right now. It kind of looked like that, sunsetting. And I just asked the ocean, I was like, what do you want me to do with my life? And I heard clear as day the word music. And from that point on, I've just dedicated my life to it.
Wow. Bringing that back, we're talking about how music makes the mind work. I'd love to hear your insights on that with psychedelics. How does that perhaps amplify the musical experience?
Kind of the etymology of the word psychedelic. It's to illuminate the mind. Every psychedelic has a different kind of little pocket that it fits into and how it affects our mind, but they all enhance the experience of music. And in fact, every psychedelic I've ever done without music, it's just kind of doesn't really make any sense. Like even if I'm by myself in the woods, I end up like smacking against a rock or something. Music brings you home, right? And so whenever I'm freaking out or having some weird experience with psychedelics, the music is what not only brings me back to me, but it also enhances the experience in an amazing way. And I think what music does is it kind of turns the inner eye inward a little bit more and lets you see how your body is reacting in a much more sensitive place. And it in some ways it's your brain, I'm not sure what's happening or if I even understand why this happens, but it's like your brain and the music sort of merge and you become much more in the present moment, because what makes music different than almost any other art form or any kind of expression is that it's time. Music is about time. You can't pause music and admire it. You can't think of it as something that can exist outside of the now, because it is only experienced in the now. And I think just that alone, when you're dealing with psychedelics, often kind of obliterate the idea of future and past or whatever and bring you into the present moment. I think that's probably the greatest asset that the tool of psychedelics offers. And what is music? Music is now. And so it helps kind of sharpen the sense of now because you're existing in the now. So the two work together seamlessly in that way. It's all about the now, and what could be better, what could be it's like a tool in your tool belt to like really celebrate the now.
How do you feel like meditation then, if you throw that as almost like a third leg on a stool here with psychedelics and music? What do you feel like that adds to what you've just said?
I think that if you have discipline, and I mean, anyone doesn't really need psychedelics, period, but it's a choice that we all make, right? If we want to explore that part of our brains, you can get to the same place through meditation. And I know a lot of people who do that. I personally have had a very difficult time with meditation, getting to that place. However, I have done it. But like I said, it requires a lot of discipline and a lot of kind of forward effort to release the effort that you put into it. So in a way, I think psychedelics are kind of a shortcut. Is that a bad thing? I don't think so, but it is a little bit of a kind of like a little stepping stone to get into that same place. I think that the power of meditation for me now is almost, in a strange way, it's almost like squeezing my like pituitary gland or something to release the feeling of psychedelics without the need for psychedelics. And it can kind of, it's sort of it requires work and a certain mindset to get there, but it can be done. And so I think it's a very important tool to have if you can, because it's probably a lot easier on your psyche and your brain to be able to get there through meditation.
Going one step further, we're talking about the lessons you've learned from music, psychedelics, meditation. What lessons have you learned specifically about yourself, about your identity, whether it be from music, from psychedelics, from meditation?
I mean, there's different aspects of what music brings to my life. And of course, there's the whole performer side of it and the whole relationship that I have with the community. And that part has been the most exhilarating and explosively awesome gift that I've been able to somehow facilitate for myself, is to be able to create and kind of a shortcut to community. You know, I could show up in like St. Louis on a Wednesday night, not know a soul, and by the end of the night I have a whole crew of new friends and a community that I feel like I'm somehow a part of. Or let's say someone plays my song at a wedding and I've never even met them, and I'll meet them 5 years later, and I'm already a part of their life. And so that part of it is absolutely incredible. And that's the whole community. But that really has nothing to do with the music itself, which I find more of the actual moment of performing, or more poignantly for me is the actual producing. I mean, producing is where, when I'm home in my studio alone making music, I mean, that's where the kind of the magic of self-understanding comes. And there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering, and I mean that like in the actual moment of production, there can be massive ego death, there could be total celebration and elation, there could be dancing around, there could be laying on the ground in a fetal position. There's like everything is possible. So kind of you're pushing yourself. If you're trying to create something that is an expression of who you are and what you are as a person, then you need to explore all the different parts of who you are. And that can be very it can just kind of expand your understanding of who you are. And that can be, it's like stretching your mind, stretching your emotions, and stretching your story, and also what's possible. So I've learned a lot about my ego. I've learned about what my needs are. Sometimes I need praise, and sometimes I need to be completely alone, and sometimes I care, and sometimes I don't want to give a shit and I become a nihilist. Or sometimes I'm like, there's just all these different parts of who I am sort of all become kind of thrown into this big stew, and you just keep consuming it and keep trying to recognize who you are. And so it's confusing, it's awesome, it's beautiful, but I think at the end of the day, it helps you discover yourself. And this is possible, I think, with any kind of art form that it involves self-expression. It's just like you eventually learn more and more and more about where your story and how that's an illusion, and your identity is an illusion. And that really, because you're creating something that's no different than who you are as a person, you can constantly be creating and recreating and discovering all at the same time.
We're talking about healing here. So there's been many studies regarding how psychedelic therapy can be very healing.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine your music might have been used in some of these studies. I'd love to hear, your thoughts, your take on that.
I think there's a couple different ways to approach it, and a couple different methodologies. I mean, obviously the first one that most of us get to experience would be like, dropping acid at a festival or something. And maybe that just heals you by like letting you see the beauty of all life and all existence. And that can be extremely healing, to celebrate and to not have any reason for it, just to want to feel good. And there's something really powerful in the healing that can come with that. Next level would be something kind of like a more intentional, like an ayahuasca ceremony or something like that, where you're taking what most people call a medicine that gets inside of you and rips you open. And it can be very beautiful, and it can also be very terrifying. And there's a lot of healing that can come with that. I mean, I know I've personally experienced with like ayahuasca, and how it's affected me was like being like absolutely terrified and really uneasy. My body's hurting, everything's in pain. And then going into the music is what brings me back. Going in, like, start singing, start playing an instrument, really start moving my body with the music. And that can be really powerful. And just to know that we have a tool to get beyond our minds. And so no matter how scared we are in some sort of situation outside of the psychedelic experience, we know that we can go inside of ourselves and find a center and find a peace. And whether it's actually actively with music or just the thought of music, there's something about that can be very grounding. The next level is that I was really fortunate enough with my partner, Michelle. We did a couples, an actual amazing psychiatrist. We did a totally above ground couples therapy ketamine session, where they did injectable ketamine, and did a whole lead up with amazing friends of mine, Will and Krista. They run this clinic in Boulder, Colorado. And so basically you do a bunch of lead ups, like typical kind of therapy type stuff, asking questions, answering, whatever. And then it all culminates and going into his office, and I laid on her lap, and then injects the ketamine, and you basically just go completely out of your body, out of your mind. And it's like 45 minutes trip. Very psychedelic, but also very warm and cozy, and kind of, complete ego death. There's music involved as well. And then you kind of just like wake up in your partner's arms or their lap, and there you are, you see them, and kind of like getting reborn, and then processing that for like an hour. And then she took a turn and did the same thing. And it was absolutely incredible. It really was what we needed in our relationship. There's something very vulnerable about being obliterated in your partner's lap. The kind of gentle, it's similar to ayahuasca and the psychedelic aspect of it. However, it's much more gentle on your, there's no struggle. I know people use ketamine recreationally, going out to the club and all that. This is a completely different type of experience when it's done in a clinical setting, clinical dosage to your body weight, injected. I mean, it just feels like a totally different drug. And they're doing tons of research on it. His clinic, I think, was one of the first in the country. I think, we were like one of the first couples to be able to do it legally. I think like the 7th in the country or something. But I think it's like kind of the next level, is this ketamine assisted therapy. I know that it's really effective for depression. And, I know people say this and that, but it is a psychedelic, and there's something really interesting about that, how it works. And I've never felt anything like it. So I'm excited about where research comes of it and where that goes in therapy.
You mentioned the vulnerability of that session. I want to kind of zoom out and just like pick your brain, like about the power of vulnerability in general.
I think that, if you do music long enough and you perform long enough, you're going to be put into so many situations where something completely falls to shit. Like whether it's technically like, oh, like your monitor goes out, you can't fucking hear anything, or the sound system cuts out completely, or some asshole like pushes over your gear on stage, whatever. Or maybe you just that night weren't on fire. You just played a bad set and you feel horrible about it. It really forces you, your ego just gets smacked around, and you think that you're on top of the world. And then 1 second later, you feel like a horrible person. What am I doing with my life, kind of thing. The vulnerability aspect of it is to be ready for those experiences, to be open to those experiences happening, and to not hold on to them, to acknowledge your feelings around it. Like, oh, that really hurt, that felt bad or whatever. But then to be ready and to be able to move on, and accept that's a part of the journey. And that vulnerability, I think that's where the vulnerability comes in for me, is just really rolling with the punches that life gives you, period. And whether that has to do with my performance or just my day-to-day life, and being able to not be ashamed and to be able to share with anyone how you feel about it. There's a lot of power in just being true to how you feel and not trying to put on an act for anyone. I mean, of course, there's the aspect of when you are performing itself. I mean, you're not going to sit there and say, oh, I fucked up. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about more in the day-to-day life that we live and the people that are close to us and that kind of thing. So that's where I've learned about vulnerability, is just to be open to failure and to learn from it, and not to get hung up on the little minutia of mistakes that we have to make to get there.
Rab, thank you for, your vulnerability with these answers, for being so generous with your thoughts here. Wrapping up, I want to go out on a limb and I want to ask you this kind of scripted question here. So if you had to pick just 3, what would you say are the 3 greatest truths about life that you've come to learn in your years?
Probably good love, family, good food. That's all you need.
Awesome, Rab. Well, if you're listening to this, I'm sure you know where to find him, at Random Rab. Rab, you got shows coming up? Any news, any messages for any of your fans out there listening?
Yes, doing a big, it's through COVID, had to kind of clam things up a little bit. We're opening back up. Have the next month or so off, and then we're hitting the road and doing a big spring tour all over the place. So lots of West Coast shows, lots of festival shows. You can find all the information about my tour on my website, or Instagram or whatever. But I got lots of shows coming up. I have a new album coming out early this year, and I'm very excited about that. I've been working on that. I have a new side project with Ilya Goldberg, who's the violin player for Emancipator, but also an incredible producer that goes by Lapa. And we're working on a duo side project called DOS, and we're releasing an album sometime this year. I also have a single coming out with the amazing Cloud Chord. That's coming out, I think, in a couple weeks. And then I have another single coming out with this incredible duo out of Denver, Colorado called Lady, LVDY. And we made a banger of a track And so that's about to come out soon too. So there's a lot of stuff in the pipeline. Took a kind of a break from doing a lot of stuff during COVID, but excited to come out swinging in 2022.
Oh yeah, well, Random Rab, everybody. Round of applause. We love you, man. So here we are. This is the Weird Music Podcast with very special guests. We got Getz up in here. So the Upful LIFE podcast, that's Brian's thing here. He's done a lot of awesome interviews with similar artists that have been on this show.
So for a musician, I like to ask for the come to Jesus moment. I must do this. This is my life.
Tell me your moment like that with Upful LIFE podcast.
This might sound like bullshit, but it's the truth, which is why I reacted the way I did when you told me about the guest you were just on, but it was Rab, which was like episode 6. So I have a really storied cosmic history with him, in a way like that's unique that I don't really have with a lot of artists.
With Random Rab.
With Random Rab, right. You spoke with him earlier today, right? So when he came on my podcast, long story short, my first Burning Man in 2013 was his 16th consecutive. And I think he's up to like, whatever, do the math. I don't think he's missed one. So he's in the low 20s now, right? But, so it was like old hat for him. And it was like, one of those come to Jesus moments for me was my first burn. And which I was already like in my early 30s. So I got there late in life, and Rab had been doing it since a teenager. And I saw him perform for the first time on a sunrise on a morning. Again, my first time experiencing a lot of this kind of stuff, sunrise sets and the sort of Burning Man's not a music festival, but I'm a music guy. I'd been with Jambase for years and been to a million festivals, just never Burning Man. And about an hour after he performed, I was riding my bike and I saw him struggling to light a cigarette by himself outside this huge like Android Jones art installation thing. That again, that was also brand new to me, this whole world of big art and stuff. And I just, before I could talk myself out of it, I just rolled up to him, helped him light his cigarette, and told him I just watched him perform. And it was like next level. I said in as many words as I could, like, I'm a music guy, this is my first burn. And like, that was everything. Thank you. And like a friendship was born. So that was 2013. In the interim, I had like gone to jail for a year, which is part of the story. And while I was in jail, my dad had passed away. And I called the local radio station, which was inclined to play music of a Burning Man nature. And I asked them, could they play some Random Rab, and they did. So fast forward to when I get out, I went back to Burning Man, and won't get into all the emotional stuff, but I ran into him and I had the opportunity to tell him that in person where we met, roughly 1,000 days, give or take, since that happened. And it fucked him up in a good way. And then we basically ported that to the podcast, that narrative, like 2 hours long story of that, his life, my life, music. And at the end of that, like, we were sitting in his van outside Cornerstone in Berkeley here in the Bay Area. He was playing a gig, and we had this conversation about life, about everything. And when I put that out, the response, the way that resonated with people, again, it was episode 6. And I'd had some cool episodes already, like Mikey from Turquoise and Weedy Brema. But that one, the Random Rab one, what I had facilitated there was so profound for me personally. And it resonated with people around the world. Like I got emails, people I hadn't seen since this festival or that festival, people who had lost a parent, people who had been in jail or addicted to drugs, or all the stuff we talked about, which included a number of things in his own life. And to be able to deliver that in podcast form, doing that was like, this is your thing. And here we are. That was 3.5 years ago.
You made it this far. Thank you for listening, and a big thank you to our sponsors, Hemp Relief CBD, SEM Tickets, Devil Wind Brewing, and Artillery Productions. We got links in the description below. Go check out all the awesome stuff they've got going on. And yeah, much love, everyone.